Hey there, I'm Nick.
And I'm Lewis.
Welcome to the Collective Cast, a podcast by and for indie app developers.
We're here to have an open and honest conversation about the highs and lows of app development.
So today we're going to be talking about the benefits and challenges of being both an indie app developer and a digital nomad. And one of the first things I wanted to mention, if you've been listening to this podcast, is the difficulty in finding a consistent recording location to record a podcast about indie app development. Because since Lewis and I started this, I have recorded in Barcelona, London, and I'm now in Berlin. So if you notice some episodes I'm very echoey, in other ones I sound kind of, clipped or whatever, it's because I've recorded in 3 different cities, in different rooms, in different Airbnbs, with what is now 3 different microphones. And I've tried to find a good balance so that I sound adequate and I'm not just like hiding in a bathtub with a towel over my head. But it seems like for now it's probably default MacBook audio microphone and then the smallest possible room in my Airbnb. So I hope you will forgive any of my audio foibles.
I like to imagine you hiding in a bathtub with the towel over your head, no matter what you're doing. I think that's quite a powerful image for the listeners and for myself.
Thank you. I would say we would include that in the show notes, but we should not do that.
Okay. And I think it's kind of that is quite a good metaphor for the whole of digital nomadism in terms of challenges, the inconsistencies in everything. Everything is different all the time. And so you're constantly kind of battling different things. And yeah, I think you have another example of that as well.
I do. We'll talk a little bit later about a lot of the advantages of constantly moving around, but one of the disadvantages is you can't necessarily guarantee your Wi-Fi quality at your Airbnb. So I recently just took a mini vacation with family through Scandinavia, after which my partner Kit and I ended up here in Berlin. And since we had taken, a week off, no work, no anything else, we kind of had a packed week. So we basically needed to hit the ground running. So we get in about 10:30 at night on a Sunday, and our host is showing us the place. It looks great. And then right before they walk out, they're like, oh, and the Wi-Fi went down earlier today, so we're working on it, but we'll probably have it fixed by tomorrow. And then it's kind of like exit stage left. And we're like, because my partner, has maybe 3 calls a day every day this week, and I obviously need to do all of my own work. So it was obviously not an ideal situation. And so that first night, I was trying to debug their wireless router just in case it was a hardware issue. Spoiler alert, it was not. And then the next day, they said they would get us like a 3G hotspot. And what really that meant was the day after that, they got us a SIM card, just, like a data-only SIM card. And it wasn't activated. And when we tried to activate it, it basically just wouldn't connect to the Vodafone cellular network, and you needed to connect to it and get an SMS authentication. So basically for the first 3 days of this week, we just had to pay for day co-working passes because, you could get discounts for paying for longer, but we were hoping that, each day it's each day is the last day we'll have to deal with this. And then it continued and continued. So now we have an equilibrium. And actually right now I'm literally recording with my phone is acting as a hotspot over by the window with the SIM card that they gave us plugged in. And, later today we'll probably go and co-work out at a cafe. So it's all worked out now, but, we're at Thursday in the morning and this whole thing took most of the week to resolve, which is definitely the darker underbelly of being a developer or really any digital nomad that has time-sensitive needs when you switch locations.
Yeah, exactly. And it's that kind of hitting the ground running bit that you said about is the tricky bit, isn't it? Because you really want to go at a fast pace all the time. And when you're in a new place, especially if you haven't been there before, then it can be really difficult. Just everything is a learning experience and not productive time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and what we normally try and do is try and factor that in. But there's still unavoidable things where something like in this scenario, you had factored for there being good Wi-Fi because you've been told there would be good Wi-Fi, and then there's some problem on the network end or whatever it is. And that is more difficult for a non-German to deal with than it is for someone who's local and could just get it all sorted and would know what to do.
Yeah, and actually, it's funny. Like, you tend to, in hindsight, blame yourself a little more. Where when we booked this particular Airbnb, there weren't a ton of really attractive options for this time period in the summer. And so we went through the reviews and we noted about a year ago, a few people had complained about the Wi Fi. And so we were like, you know what? It's been a year, but let's not take any chances. And Kit did like a long dialogue with them about, look, this is, we're freelancers, we need good Wi-Fi. And they were like, oh yeah, we totally have it fixed, everything is great. So we had like extra confirmation that the Wi-Fi was good. And even so, we would normally do what you said you do, which is give yourself a kind of like a grace period upon entering a new city, just in case anything happens. The problem mostly was that we had just come off a mini holiday, and so like we had basically like stored up as much free time as we could, and there just wasn't a lot left. And so we basically like we really needed to get to it. So it was unfortunate that there was like just like no wiggle room this time.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. That is super frustrating.
But hey, we are past it now. And so in case other people out there who are freelance developers but not digital nomads think this lifestyle is all negatives, that's actually one of the rare like bad instances upon switching a city. Because the main thing I wanted to mention, that is a benefit of being both an indie app developer and a digital nomad, is that every time you switch locations, you go to a new city or a new country, it's a constant source of new creativity. Like Lewis, you had mentioned that when you go to a new city, you have to figure out all the new bits about it. But that also means you have new cafes to co-work. It means there's new defaults in coffee and lunch and parks and the way people eat out and have fun. And I feel like all of that, for me at least as a developer, is incredibly rejuvenating and powerful. And actually, if I'm in a place for more than a few weeks, I actually start to stagnate and my creativity actually takes a hit. So I love moving somewhere new like every month.
I totally agree. Certainly, just when you're in a new place, like everything is new and exciting, and it is really rejuvenating is probably the word to have new experiences, even in trivial everyday things. I really love going to supermarkets in different places. I don't know why. There's just something about something as mundane as a supermarket can be so different between different countries, and you can get a real feel for a country just from what's featured and the kind of funny names of things and like I don't know. I really love it. It's really cool. It does. It makes like the work so much easier because there's just always, of course, as well, food. You can have these different meals. Every meal is different, and it's very refreshing and it gives you more energy to do work. I think.
I think you're totally right. And also, if you're not the type of person who needs a fixed setup, like I know there are plenty of people that like to have, their external monitor and their good desk with their Aeron chair. And if you need that, that's wonderful, and I hope you can have it. But at least for me, like I don't really need any particular kind of physical setup. Like as long as I have my laptop and strong Wi-Fi, strong enough Wi-Fi, I'm pretty comfortable working anywhere. And yeah, I love that idea that I might go out and it's an entirely different style of cafe. Maybe it's just something as simple as like the chairs and the tables are different. But most often, like here in Germany, they don't actually, like, my drink of choice is normally an iced latte, and they don't actually do what you would call a standard latte here. They do what's called like a latte macchiato, which is basically just a latte with cappuccino foam at the top. It's almost a trivial difference, but it's funny because I just spent a week going around Norway, and then I was in London before that, and my coffee ordering habits have to change in each place. But it means when I'm working out, it feels like I'm living an entirely different mini life.
Yeah, yeah. I know exactly what you mean.
But all those fun benefits aside, there are definitely some drawbacks that Lewis and I both know. I think for me the hardest one is always that you don't have a fixed network, right? Like if there's a few cities I've been to where had I lived there, it would be great to join a particular co-working space or become a regular at a certain cafe. And if only having access to a local network of either friends, resources, developers, things like that. And it's actually one of the reasons Lewis and I started this podcast is because as indie app developers, you're already incredibly isolated. And we were trying to take steps to actually rectify that.
Yeah, I agree. And even if you stay in a place for a long time, if it's a place where there's a lot of digital nomads, and they tend to be the people you hang out with, and then they're coming and going as well. So we stayed in, say, Chiang Mai for 3 months, and after a couple of months, you start to feel quite fixed. But then your friends are upping and leaving, and people are coming and going, and the social part of it is. I don't know whether I'd say it's depressing, but it's definitely a negative factor.
And actually, it's funny because when Kit and I lived in Santa Monica and I worked a full time job and then later freelancing, I built all these amazing connections and I don't feel like getting newbie nomad on it, but, I feel like any good digital nomad who's a developer should have built up a network of connections first before becoming both a freelancer and a nomad because it's incredibly helpful. With that being said, I lived in Santa Monica for 3 years. I didn't generate that much amazing new code then for myself. And, that was beautiful weather, amazing food and coffee and things like that because my environment was unchanging. Whereas right now, every time I change locations, I feel like it's definitely like a creative kick to your brain. Even if it's like, we sometimes talk about how you have to make sure you're not just developing for like the straight white male. You have to develop for people of different cultures, backgrounds, people who might be dyslexic or slightly colorblind, full accessibility in your apps, like descriptions, to localize for different languages. There's so many things that maybe you would consider them in any situation, but I feel like by traveling a lot, it really puts a lot of those things at the forefront. And I'm the first to admit I commit many sins in my app development where I do mostly English language only. I'm not 100% sure how accessible they are. And they are things I am trying to address as I go forward in new apps, but it's definitely something that I haven't taken as much time as I should have.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one thing that is a flip side to what you were saying there about the lack of social interaction, the kind of flip of that is that there is actually you do meet a lot of new people as well. So if you were staying in one place, you would have a more solid group, and but on the other hand, you would meet a lot less people. There's a lot less new people coming into your life. Whereas when you're traveling around a lot and you're in a community where a lot of people are traveling around a lot, you make friends that you wouldn't have made otherwise. And so there is some kind of balance in that regard.
Yeah, and it's a great point you made, Lewis, about meeting new people because as much as I want to be fair and even about the pros and cons of being a digital nomad or not, especially in terms of being an app developer, I personally think that being a digital nomad is the greatest, and there's not really any downsides for someone like me, especially since, like you said, you meet so many new people everywhere you go, and actually all of my good friends in my life right now have been met as a nomad somewhere in the world. And we often joke, like I've joked with you a few times, like, how many country buddies are we or how many city buddies are we? And you just meet so many different amazing people and expand your network that way. And that can only reflect positively on your app development.
Yeah, exactly. And who you know and what you learn from them is one of the most important things in kind of being a human, really. So yeah, absolutely. Giving yourself the opportunity to meet as many new people as possible is a really powerful thing.
Yeah, and actually, now that I think of it, last year, the app I built for 7 and 7, which is the digital nomad conference that I put on with other nomads and that Lewis has attended because he's an amazing nomad, the app I built for the conference itself actually had some amazing feedback because we had people from, North America, South America, Southeast Asia, Western and Eastern Europe, and all those different opinions, different default languages, different expectations about app usage led to some really amazing use cases and user testing. And so, even for me and Lewis right now, with the apps we're making on the App Collective, the people who are our backers have so far provided like really amazing feedback because they have these entirely unique perspectives, which means when they're testing out our apps, they will totally catch things that we might never catch, which means we're going to be better developers and provide better products.
Yeah, yeah. You can't have too much insight from different people, really, can you?
Yeah, it's kind of like, whenever you hear about a television show and it's just like all straight white male writers, and sometimes it would be a show like about two women, and there might be only like one woman writer or something like that. And you're always like, why? Why isn't it all women writers in that room? And, it just because we're software developers doesn't mean we can't fall prey to the same tropes and issues.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I was wondering if we wanted to mention, because I know we as developers always have a grass is green scenario, like, oh, maybe people working at that company are happier, or maybe I should use React instead of Bootstrap, or, like you get all these different thoughts about like whatever someone else is doing is the better way to develop. Like, I know when I've listened to how you've built some of your apps and some of the technologies you've used, I've been like, damn it, I'm doing everything entirely wrong. And so I wonder if we could do like a little fun breakdown of the different kinds of developers there are out there, and maybe why what we're doing is the best.
Yeah, sure. Let's do it.
All right, I'm going to break down. I think, I wrote down four basic categories. You have developers who work at a company just for the paycheck, what I would call the salaried grunt. And then you have developers who work at a company, but they actually really love the company or respect it. They have like a connection with the ethos or a particular product at that company. And I would call that person the evangelist. Then you have those who work for themselves with other clients, who I would call the contractor. This was me for the first 6 or so years of digital nomad life. And then finally, you have those who work for themselves on their own projects, or the indie app developer, or both of us.
Yeah, that's it. And so I'm in the same situation as you in that have been doing freelancing for most of the time, but I'm now able to exist off the indie app money, which is really good. And so in terms of the if we go through them all in terms of the pros and cons, like I feel like the salaried grunt, as you so elegantly put it, actually gets a bum deal in terms of how they are. Yeah, in terms of it seems like this is the worst option. But I actually think that for a lot of people, especially people beginning, and especially people who are developers, that this is probably the best option because it takes away a lot of the headaches of the other options. It gives you a lot of the benefits. So you can have consistent income, which is until you've not had a consistent income, there is no way you can appreciate how good it is to know how much you're going to have each month. So that is a huge advantage. And you kind of you know what your work is. You can really everything is very focused. So much is chosen for you that actually your time when you're not working is well defined, and you can really enjoy the digital nomad lifestyle and kind of everything that comes with it, especially if you're in somewhere like Asia or somewhere or Southeast Asia at least, where it's a lot cheaper than it would be. Your salary is suddenly worth 2 or 3 times what it was before. There are huge advantages, and I think it's much easier to get into than people think. Like if you're an established developer at a company, if they like you, developers are hard to come by. You're in a strong position. If you're a good hard worker and you have a good reputation within your company, you're in a strong position to be able to go and say to your boss, hey, how about you let me work from home for 1 day a week? And then that becomes 2 days a week. And then you can build that up over time to the point where you're fully remote. And tech companies are much more open to that than a lot of companies because tech companies are savvy with communication tools like Slack and things like that. And also, the idea of having workers overseas is pretty prevalent in a lot of tech companies. So, outsourced work and freelance work is pretty common in tech. And so, the idea of moving an employee overseas or not in the same building is pretty common. And so if you're kind of an aspiring digital nomad, I would think really hard first of all about how you could sell it to your boss that you working not in the office. Don't position it as overseas, just position it as working from home, and you kind of edge yourself into working from home full time, and then suddenly home isn't the same city anymore, it's a different country.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said there. Working full time, especially at a company you don't particularly have any attachment to, can be really powerful and beneficial, especially for either a developer who's just getting started, or like you said, it's an amazing transition to remote work and the digital nomad lifestyle. Not everyone is cut out to like create their own business right away and just go it alone. Like, it can be nice to have a little bit of a safety net where you go remote first, especially like you said, like if you're making dollars or pounds and then you move to Southeast Asia for a few months, your salary is multiplied several times over, and that can give you a much longer runway to figure out your life.
And you could even negotiate a pay drop and still be better off. So if they're like, if your company is a bit like, oh, I'm not sure about this, you say, well, how about you give me a 20% pay cut? How does that feel? And then you move to Thailand, you've just, even with a 20% pay cut, you've really doubled at least your disposable income. And so you've got a lot of flexibility with your choices when it comes to things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I would hope that someone who is a full remote worker doesn't fall prey to what I'll call the Chiang Mai trap, which is where an entrepreneur will become a digital nomad, move to Chiang Mai to bootstrap their business, but they don't make very much money off of it. And so they actually end up basically becoming expats in Chiang Mai because, for those who don't know, you can basically live a solid life in Chiang Mai for about 10,000 US a year. And so you don't really have to actually get anything done. Whereas if you're a remote worker and, like Lewis said, you have that nice salary coming in, you can probably go do a whole lot of things. And since it's a company that you're just basically using as a paycheck to travel the world, you probably have a pretty good amount of like ability to move around as long as you're able to handle any like stand up meetings or anything you have to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing to mention quickly is that often people think that the time zone stuff is a disadvantage, but you can frame that as an advantage as well. I know that there's places where I've been freelancing where they hand stuff over to me in the afternoon and then it's done for them by the next morning. And so actually it gives them more of like a 24-hour kind of feel. So obviously it's not always ideal, but you can certainly, if you are conscious of it, you can certainly look for ways to make it an advantage to the employer and to yourself that you're in a different time zone to where the work is happening, as long as you have some overlap.
Yeah, that's absolutely a good point. I feel like we're going to be doing a little side tangent. We're going to be doing workshops this year at 7 and 7, and I feel like Lewis and I are setting up like all the different reasons of how and why you should set up a remote team. So I feel like we're gonna come back to this topic at some point.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's really interesting. I actually feel like, to hit very smallly on the topic of the evangelist, I actually feel like that would be a much harder version of remote work to do, because if you were actually deeply emotionally invested in the company you work for, I feel like that would then bleed over into your the rest of your life. And I know there is trouble with the term work-life balance, but there's definitely something about having a split of the work you do and then the things you do, the creative pursuits you have outside of your paid profession. And I know, at least for me, I've never really worked with a company like I've loved, but I've worked with companies where, you've kind of gone all in, and it kind of wrecks the rest of your life. Like you don't really get anything else done. And I feel like that's not healthy in any context, but it's doubly dangerous as a digital nomad, because then, you could be in some amazing locale and not really experiencing it because you're constantly working on this product.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think if you're giving yourself a wholly to a company, then I think that is great if you do really love the company or the work you're doing and everything. But if a company is sucking that from you, like by force almost, then is not a good situation, and that's time to look at what your other options are.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I feel like developers, at least the developers who work full time, sometimes feel like they don't have a lot of choice, and you can feel stuck in a role because it can feel difficult to change roles or to even change from full time to freelance. But I feel like in that regard, while you and I, Lewis, have a ton of uncertainty, say in our potential future, I feel like there's also nothing holding us back other than our own ability to succeed.
Sure. Yeah, I totally agree.
But actually, so that bounces into, if we want to kind of combine the final two types of developers that we've laid out, which is basically you're a freelancer and you either work for clients or you work for yourself on your own projects. And I think we might have touched upon this in the original podcast or maybe some of the demos that we ditched. But most of my freelance life has been as a contractor. And in short, it's amazing because you make a crazy ton of money. You have fixed projects. So even if you have a stressful project, it's usually over in a couple weeks or a month. And you can basically then, like, just like with the remote work, you can basically then live whatever kind of life you want, more or less doing whatever you want. The downside is you basically have absolutely no other creative time. Like, when I work contract work, even if it's only 20, 25 hours a week, I am completely spent creatively when I'm done with it. And I have only built maybe one app in 3 years when I have client work. And like, for some people that might be fine, but if you want to build your own products, it's an eventual, like, loggerheads where you have to kind of pick one path or the other, for me at least.
Yeah, it is definitely more difficult to balance those two things at once. And yeah, so for me, in terms of kind of pros and cons of freelancing, like the biggest advantage of freelancing is obviously you'll probably get paid more per hour at least, and you have more flexibility than an employee has generally speaking. So the relationship is a bit more balanced in a freelancer's favor. Yeah, so those things are really good. The big disadvantage is that you have to spend a lot more time kind of looking for work often, and a lot of unpaid time. So, or at least in my experience, actually hunting down the work can take a lot of time, and then you tend to have to do your paperwork and your administration and stuff like that. You have to do yourself. And then also, as we implied before, it can be very feast or famine. You can have, three clients come along at once, and you haven't got time to work with all of them. And then you also haven't got time to look for new contracts. And so when that's all finished, you haven't got any new work, and you can go for weeks without having any work. And that can be really stressful. And so that kind of up and down for me is a big cause of stress. And it's something that you can obviously look at, and it kind of gets into the bit where you need to look at it more as a business owner, and spending serious kind of thought and effort on doing your marketing and things like that. And that almost becomes the most important skill more than your technical ability in some ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're 100% right about the stress aspect. I know for myself at least, if I was working a project, especially if it was full time but short term, I would be constantly stressed out and angry while working on it. And then when the project ended and I had no other projects, I would be stressed out about finding the next project. So it was kind of like, damned if you do, damned if you don't. And like you said, like, you would often have multiple projects come along and you can't do them all. But if you say no to this one client, you might not get another project the next time. And that just turns into a whole mess. And then, continuing that trend of, you mentioned unpaid labor in searching for new projects, I often lament the fact that when we're building our own apps, that is unpaid until some hopeful payoff when we release the app and it makes money. But if you're not making any money and you're searching for work, that unpaid labor will never lead to anything if you don't get a project. Whereas if you build an app, even if that is unpaid, and even if you never release it, you'll still gain software development knowledge. You'll foster your creativity, and it may lead to something that does end up being a paying opportunity.
I think that probably leads us on to the kind of indie developer option, as it were. And so, from my perspective, this is the extremes of everything. So, if you can make it work, then it is the best option because you have complete control over your time, at least in theory. And you can, in theory, with as an app developer, you're earning kind of passive income. So if I do nothing today, I will still make app sales. And obviously, you can't do that indefinitely, but there is some amount of time where you can keep earning passively from apps. It also has the highest earning potential because there is, with freelancing, you're never going to get £10,000 a day as a freelancer. There is a ceiling of how much you can earn. Whereas with your own product, there is no ceiling. Potentially, you could be making millions of pounds a day in theory. Obviously, most people don't, but you have more control over that, and there is definitely no firm ceiling in place there. And also, and kind of tied into that, like the same thing is you don't get paid for the work you do, but for the value that you create. That is kind of the best thing, but also leads to the worst thing, which is that it's kind of creating value is harder than you think. And this is a super high risky option. Like most apps get very few downloads and make very little money. And there's a certain amount of luck and kind of perseverance and all of these things. It's kind of the easiest thing to fail at. I mean that in a sympathetic way, in that lots of people who are very smart and try very hard and not have the kind of the piece of luck that they need or whatever it is, and can not succeed at this.
Yeah, those are all really great points. I definitely consider like being an indie app developer like the hardest difficulty mode of being both a developer and a freelancer digital nomad. But like you said, it's also got the most potential boons. And I really like your point about the ceiling for earning potential because I never really thought of it like that. Like you're right though. If you're at least as a developer, you don't normally outsource your work, which means you can never make more than your hourly rate or a project rate as a contractor, even as a remote worker. But like you said, like us, like if we get lucky making a certain number of apps, you can actually make an unlimited amount of revenue. And while no app is ever truly passive, if you can keep the maintenance down to like an hour a week or something like that, you can release like a whole suite of apps and they're effectively passive. And I know like at least for me, like that is one of my overall goals. Like I'm not under any delusion that I'm going to release like an amazing multi-million dollar app anytime soon, but I'm hoping to release many decently selling apps that can have staying power over the years, and then those combined together give me like quite a bit of financial security in order to pursue even more random and creative apps.
I think one of the other things that is in a lot of these things that it's all kind of double-edged swords, and so one of the things that's both the biggest freedom and the worst thing is kind of the total lack of structure that you have when you're making your own stuff, and so you can do literally whatever you want, but also you don't necessarily know what the right thing to do is, and so compared to a freelancer, you do what you're told and then you get the money. And at the end of the day, you feel tired, but you can happily kind of count up the dollars and feel good about that. Whereas when you are doing the own products thing, you're really gambling every day. Like if what I spend my time on, I hope is going to be what's going to see me get some payoff in the future. And you can learn and improve on those things, but there's always a high element of risk and not being totally sure that what you're doing is the right thing in terms of payoff in the end.
You basically just described the quarter life crisis I've been going through for about the past 5 years.
Yeah, that's it. I think it's difficult to overstate what an impact that can have on you. Like human beings really need structure and framework and everything. And all the successful people that I know who have their own business, they have a lot of structure and framework which they've imposed themselves in order to be productive and to be successful.
Yeah, I agree. And I realized for myself at least, like I like everyone needs some structure, but I do not want any more than I need. Like I would much prefer to just have what you would call like a lifestyle business, like, my and our apps make enough money so that, I can travel with kid as a digital nomad doing basically whatever. And I'm perfectly happy with that. Like I don't need to be the person who levels up 10x and has a company making $4 million a year, and then I sell it and make another company. And like I don't need to be doing that. I don't need to be like crushing it, working 100 hours a week, and living like startup Silicon Valley mentality. Like I don't know, like I want like a good balance of all the things.
One other point that I wanted to make about the making your own apps, one advantage of it from a digital nomad perspective is the fact that you can move somewhere else where the cost of living is a lot cheaper. So say you've got an idea for your product and you think that you need 3 months to get it built. If you go, you can save up a lot less money and go and do that work in Thailand than you would need to sustain that existence in New York or just anywhere in the US or Europe. It is a big advantage to be a digital nomad when you want to build your own things because you get more runway, as they say. You can move somewhere cheap and you can have more time or less pressure for your product to succeed.
Definitely. Yeah, that Kit and I often joke that if we're ever on the verge of completely running out of money, we'll basically just retreat to some part of the world where we can have a few extra months to figure things out. And it's like you said, you're not paying New York money. That was actually one of the reasons that propelled Kit and I into the digital nomad life was, we were in Santa Monica, and the company I was working for was shut down. And with the severance package I got, it would have only lasted 2 months in LA. But instead, we made it work for over 6 months traveling around the world. And now it's the time of the episode where Lewis and I share ridiculous app ideas.
Okay, so I was casting back through my notes and I found a rare app for me that was, instead of inspired by something that was useful or was kind of irritating or whatever, I remembered an idea that was inspired by pure rage. There was a time, as we've been talking about Digital Nomad, I spent quite a bit of time in Chiang Mai in Thailand. And every so often, the traffic cops would come out, and so it would kind of come in phases. So you'd be riding around on your motorbike, there's traffic cops there and they're pulling the bikes over at random, and they're checking people's licenses and just finding an excuse to take a bribe off you. And my app idea, out of the back of the rage that this caused me, was to have some kind of map or something where, sort of like Waze, where you can say there's been an accident up here. I want to be able to know where the cops are.
Ha, nice. It's kind of like a shakedown app.
Yeah, exactly. This is the thing I want to exist.
Nice.
And how about you, Nick? What's your idea for this week?
All right, mine was prompted from the other day when I was really full. I would like an app that would let me know if I'm going to regret ordering a dessert.
Oh, I like it.
I feel like I've got 2 regret levels. 1, the dessert's terrible. And 2, the dessert will make me so disgustingly overfull that I will want to cease to exist for a little while. So I would like kind of like an A/B warning on it, and that would be great.
But it sounds like something at the moment you would need a human for, but maybe you can take a photo and it goes to some pool of judges and they're looking at it and then they pass judgment and send it back to you and say, yeah, Nick, go ahead, that looks amazing, or no, don't do it.
I do like the idea of it passes it off to, say, like a group of your friends, and you're like, look, I just ate a burger, order of fries, and had 2 beers. Should I get this cheesecake? And someone could be like, don't do it. Or someone could be like, that cheesecake is dope. Get the cheesecake.
Yeah, exactly. The question for me is, how often would you actually follow their advice?
That's true, because like if I pull from one of my favorite webcomics, Heart and Brain, which has basically the misadventures of the heart and the brain, even if the brain was telling me like, we probably shouldn't eat this, you're going to be really full. If I'm looking at a thing and I'm like, that looks awesome, I'm probably still going to get it.
Yeah, that's it.
So maybe it should be like, let me know if I'm going to regret a dessert, i.e. going to need to walk for a couple kilometers afterwards to feel better after eating the dessert.
Yeah, I guess the app, you could still, if you were honest with yourself, you could still track whether you follow the advice, and then over time, the app could say, look, every time I told you were going to regret this, you went ahead and did it, and boy, did you regret it.
And now it's time for the credits in haiku. The collective cast. Nick and Lewis made. Nick did the edits.
If you like the pod, subscribe and rate us 5 stars. Help friends find the show. Okay, that's enough of that nonsense. You can find us on Twitter. Nick's at nsneebly and I'm at itinerant dev. The show's at @collectiveco. You can also get in touch on the website. We'd love to hear your feedback on this week's episode and the podcast in general.
And finally, we'd love it if you join us on Patreon. It's dangerous to go alone, and even $1 helps support us directly as app developers. There's a ton of perks, and we've got a great Slack community. You can check it all out at podcast.appcollective.co. Listen, future Nick. It's fine if you get cookies, but if you get the cake, you're going to feel awful.